Hey guys, welcome back to Wrestling News 365. Hope everyone is doing very well. As always, there is a ton of news stories to get into today regarding the world of WWE. Of course, it was night one of the WWE Draft on Friday. I know I'm a little bit late reflecting on this, but better late than never. We're going to get into all the selections of night one of the draft. Interesting how they did it as well. Before we do start on that, interesting how they did it in that we've seen WWE do a lot of things when it comes to how they do drafts in the past. That's a rhyme. How they do that, how they've done it in the past. Whether it's just deliberate selections of, okay, here's the roster, we select X, Y, and Z. We've seen that. We've seen superstars wrestling and representing their representative brands to get picks, random picks. We've seen random lotteries that have lasted across an entire month. We've seen superstar shakeups. We've now seen this format now where you have half the roster selected on one night and the other on the other night. The WWE Draft continues to evolve. I know some people were complaining going into the show, we don't know much about the rules. We don't know the draft pools. They announced prior to SmackDown Friday that half the roster would be available, or would be eligible rather, for selection. And we didn't know who they were. And I didn't think that was necessarily a bad thing. I think sometimes over the last few years when they've done the whole drafting pools thing, they did it in 2019 and 2020, you look at it and you know basically the direction of the show, where they're going to go, essentially. Okay, if I see Roman Reigns and Big E were eligible on night one, you would go, okay, Reigns is staying on SmackDown, Big E's going to Raw. It becomes obvious, and you can kind of figure out the steps that they were going in. So I'm not going to criticize WWE for that at all, actually, to be honest with you. So that was what it was. I thought the selections were interesting, but look, there's plenty of them to get into right now. So let's get into these selections for the draft. First selection, rather, Roman Reigns. Not surprising whatsoever. I think many people expected Reigns to stay on SmackDown. I think there were some people going, with what's going on with Raw at the moment and the ratings and all that kind of stuff, and Reigns dipping his toe into Monday Night Raw recently with the triple threat match he won against Lashley and Big E, and the six-man tag they had with the Bloodline and the New Day. Was WWE hinting that Reigns could go to Raw, or were they testing out the waters for Reigns going to Raw? Make no mistakes, Fox would have lost their ever-loving mind if Roman Reigns went to Monday Night Raw. He is the crown jewel of WWE. He is the crown jewel of SmackDown. He is the reason, to be honest with you, that SmackDown at the moment is doing about 2.2-ish million viewers every single week. They should be doing that. They're on network television, but Reigns is the reason. He's the best thing going in WWE. He's the biggest star, active, full-time main roster star that they have right now. He's the biggest draw that they have right now. And as such, he should be on the show that's viewed by the most people. That is Friday Night SmackDown. So no surprise that Reigns was going to stay on Friday Night SmackDown, rather. And it just meant that once Reigns gets drafted to Raw, to SmackDown, rather, the other champion gets drafted to Raw, that being Big E. So Big E staying on Monday Night Raw. Again, not a surprise. It's just confirmation of what we already kind of do anyway, so it wasn't a massive surprise. The surprises came later on. One of the surprises, of course, was Charlotte Flair getting drafted to Friday Night SmackDown. Of course, Charlotte Flair at the moment is the current Raw Women's Champion. Now, Becky Lynch was not drafted on SmackDown on Friday. She is going to be drafted, of course, on Raw. And obviously, because the Raw Women's Champion is on SmackDown now, Becky Lynch is going to be drafted to Monday Night Raw. This is one of those things that when you do the draft on two nights and you have half the roster being drafted, you start to do a bit of quick maths and you know where the other people are going to go. So the fact that Charlotte Flair is now on SmackDown and she's the Raw Women's Champion, you know that the SmackDown Women's Champion, Becky Lynch, is going to be drafted to Monday Night Raw. That's where she was previously. It was kind of surprising, if anything, that she came back and was immediately on SmackDown on Fox, because when she went on maternity leave, she was a member of the Raw roster. Now, granted, she wasn't drafted in the 2020 draft, so technically, I guess she was a free agent, so she could go wherever she wanted, but Becky Lynch is going to be drafted on Monday Night Raw, and she's going to go to Raw. That's just the case. Now, as far as what they're going to do with the titles, I know some people saw this, myself included. When I saw that Charlotte Flair had been drafted to SmackDown, I thought, here we go. She's going to drop the title again and then get another title reign like that. They're building up those title reigns for Charlotte Flair. She's got to have one of those title reigns, right? That's the booking. That's the Charlotte Flair character. She has to be a champion all the time. I see a situation similar to what they did last year with the tag team championships with the New Day and the Street Profits, in the sense that we could just see a situation where Charlotte Flair and Becky Lynch just swap their championships, because we're going to see a situation where the SmackDown Women's Champions on Raw and the Raw Women's Champions on SmackDown, and they've already set a precedent that that's what they do. They just swap them over if that happens in that case. Now, this goes back to why you have titles that are called the Raw Women's Championship or the Raw Tag Team Championship or the SmackDown Women's Championship or the SmackDown Tag Team Championship. If you had titles that just had different names, i.e. the Intercontinental Championship or the United States Championship or the WWE Championship and the Universal Championship, they can just switch over freely. When it's called the Raw Women's Championship or the SmackDown Women's Championship, you have a problem when the Raw Champion gets drafted to SmackDown. So I think, as I mentioned, Becky Lynch will get drafted to Raw and they'll swap the titles over. Interesting bit of news there when it comes to Charlotte Flair. This was an exclusive reported by Wrestling Inc. And that's that Fox reportedly requested that Raw Women's Champion Charlotte Flair move to SmackDown in the draft. Now, as I mentioned, the third pick of the first round of the 2021 WWE Draft saw SmackDown select Flair. It was briefly speculated that the fourth pick of the first round would be Raw Women's Champion Becky Lynch, but it wasn't. We'll touch on who it was in a second. Now, in an update, Wrestling Inc.'s Raj Giri noted that Fox officials specifically asked for Flair to be brought to SmackDown in the draft. There's currently no word yet on what WWE has planned for Flair and Lynch or exactly how they're going to swap the titles, but they're going to swap the titles. That is what it is. So, interesting that Fox specifically requested Charlotte Flair. Again, that's interesting news in the sense that what did WWE say to Fox to prompt that? Was it just Fox going to WWE, we want Charlotte Flair? Or was it WWE going to Fox and saying, look, Becky Lynch is going to be drafted to Monday Night Raw, and then they go, okay, well, we're okay with that as long as we get Charlotte Flair. So we don't really know the exact details on that, but it's interesting to note that Fox said, we want Charlotte Flair on our brand. They obviously know that she's a draw, or she gets ratings, or whatever it may be, but the Queen is now on the blue brand, certainly. Now, speaking of that next pick, it was actually Bianca Belair who goes to Monday Night Raw. Bit of a surprising one. Considering that she, essentially, until Becky Lynch came back, she's been the face of the SmackDown Women's Division, certainly post-WrestleMania, in the year that she's had, winning the Royal Rumble and then being the SmackDown Women's Champion until she lost the title, of course, to Becky Lynch at SummerSlam, main eventing the first night of WrestleMania against Sasha Banks. That's a big move. It's a bold move by WWE, moving her to Raw. Again, you look at who else would be going to Raw. You look at, obviously, Becky Lynch is going to be going there, so I guess she can continue her feud with Becky Lynch on Monday Night Raw. We don't know about Sasha Banks, obviously. She's going to be drafted on Raw as well. I would assume she'll probably be staying on SmackDown. But that was a one that I don't think a lot of people saw coming, and I don't know. I think it's a positive because you could argue that I don't think you can't even say she's fallen down the card because she hasn't. She's been involved with Becky Lynch and Sasha Banks and all that kind of stuff. I don't know. It's just, I think it's a statement of intent by WWE to put a big name on Monday nights, and it'll be interesting to see how Bianca Belair thrives on that show. Next one was Drew McIntyre going to SmackDown. Not surprising. I think most people expected this move to happen. Out of all the moves that people were predicting prior to the draft of people switching brands, Drew McIntyre was the top of that list. He's done everything then he can do on Raw, and he does feel very, just not bland, but he feels like he needs a fresh coat of paint. He just needs different settings, different environments, different opponents, just something just different. He was the WWE champion, won the Royal Rumble in 2020, carried Raw during the pandemic, no doubt about that, carried Raw during the Thunderdome era on his back. But the moment that fans came back, and to be honest, towards the end of the Thunderdome era, it was tiresome, and the character has become stale and it has become bland, and him walking around with his sword and reciting these weird sort of Scottish stories from the past, it just doesn't work at the moment. Now, in fairness, I think moving to SmackDown will be good for him. Does it fix the problems that he has with his booking right now or his creative? Probably not. I think in reality he's been moved to SmackDown because it's an opponent for Roman Reigns. We know that Roman Reigns is going to be facing Brock Lesnar at Crown Jewel. He's then going to be facing probably Big E at Survivor Series, and then he'll have a feud with Drew McIntyre at the end of the year. That's the end of Roman Reigns' year, I think. And Drew McIntyre is a legitimate name that could be the one to take the title off of Roman Reigns, but to be honest with you, I don't see that happening either. But I think it's a good move for McIntyre. It's a different environment, and it's a different setting, which I think is desperately needed. Next move was RK Bro staying on Monday Night Raw. Again, expected. I never expected them to be drafted to SmackDown or anything like that, or split up. We don't really know the status of Randy Orton right now. It looks like Randy Orton might once again not be medically cleared to compete, which is quite alarming considering that he had about 6 weeks off over the summer of something we didn't really know anything about, so we don't know what that is. But this was no surprise. They've been a staple of Monday Night Raw. They're the Raw Tag Team Champions. WWE tends, if they're just going to swap one title, they tend to swap one title per draft, if that makes sense. So last year it was the tag team titles. This year, obviously, it's going to be the Women's Championship. I didn't expect them to swap the tag team titles 2 years in a row, so it wasn't. It was hardly a surprise that RK Bro stayed on Monday nights. This was a surprising one because the New Day, Kofi Kingston and Xavier Woods, drafted to Friday Night SmackDown. Now, this one was surprising, of course, because we've just seen the New Day reunite on Monday Night Raw after being apart for the better part of a year, or for a year, because, of course, they were split up last year in the WWE Draft. Big E was drafted to SmackDown. Kofi Kingston and Xavier Woods were drafted to Monday Night Raw just after they'd won the Tag Team Championships. Now, given that Big E was now on Raw, and it was made official during the draft, the expectation was that, okay, the New Day are finally back together. The New Day, they're back up for Big E now. It's kind of a similar situation to when Kofi Kingston was WWE Champion, where you've got the New Day sort of there to back him up, but there's Big E's, or the champion rather, in that case it was Kofi, now it's Big E, is going to be single star. It's going to be the single star and competing in singles matches and single feuds. And they've decided to go against that. And I think I saw a lot of people saying it was the wrong call, and I can see where they're coming from there. I don't know whether it's the wrong or the right call, to be honest with you. I think it's WWE once again protecting themselves from themselves. I think that's the thing. They did it last year because they wanted to ensure that they didn't fall back on Big E's singles push. We'll just put them back with the New Day, and they'll do six-mans again, or they'll do tag team matches again. And I think that's kind of the same here. I think they're trying to say, look, no, Big E's going to be a singles guy on Raw. He's going to be the WWE champion. That's it. We're protecting ourselves from ourselves. And look, it's an interesting one. Certainly an interesting one. If it was me, I would have kept them on the same brand. But obviously, WWE just doesn't trust themselves. I think that's the situation there. I really, really do. Next one saw Edge be drafted to Monday Night Raw. Now, again, I think a lot of people actually predicted this prior to the draft. There was a lot of reports about it, wasn't there? There was lots of reports about Edge's profile being moved to the Raw side, or his merchandise being featured on Raw on WWEshop.com, that kind of stuff too. So it wasn't much of a surprise. I think USA Network will be very, very, very happy with this one, it must be said, because again, they need stars on that show, and they need names that they can count on to draw when it comes to ratings, when it comes to the Monday Night Football, the competition, especially in the key demo when it comes to, obviously, Dynamite on Wednesday nights too. Edge does that. And with the names they've got on SmackDown, Edge is kind of feuded with them all at this point, right? Whether it's Roman Reigns, he's still in the feud with Seth Rollins, and etc. And I think it's probably just the right move for him. There's fresher names on Monday Night Raw. I want to see Edge versus, say, Big E for the WWE Championship. That can be a big money feud that they can do there. There are other names as well. So I think Edge moving to Raw is the smart move. I think USA Network will be very happy with that. Again, Seth Rollins wasn't drafted on SmackDown, and given the fact that Becky Lynch wasn't drafted and she's going to Raw, one would suspect that Seth Rollins is going to be going to Monday Night Raw too. So that Edge versus Seth Rollins feud could continue on Monday nights, but we'll have to wait and see when it comes out. And again, there's a lot of assumptions, isn't there, that Becky Lynch and Seth Rollins are going to be drafted on the same brand. Because they're obviously husband and wife. But we don't know that. We don't know that. That's happened in the past. But who's to say it'll happen again in the future? We don't know. But Edge is drafted to Monday Night Raw. Happy Corbin and Madcap Moss. Well, that name debuted on SmackDown Friday. Riddick Moss is now known as Madcap Moss in WWE's just continuation of terrible names. It's becoming like a running rib at this point. Bron Breakker, Happy Corbin, Madcap Moss, Shorty G. It's just it's ridiculous. Who comes up with these names? Vince McMahon. Madcap Moss. What are we talking about? We sort of swingers in the 1930s or 40s or 50s. Madcap Moss. It's ridiculous. Absolute ridiculous. But they're on SmackDown and, okay. Who cares? Speaking of who cares, the Women's Tag Team Champions, NIKKIA.S.H and RHEA Ripley, they're drafted to Monday Night Raw. I mean, I don't really have any analysis on it either. Okay. Women's tag team titles mean nothing at this point. They really do. I'm happy that Rhea Ripley's, got a title again, but it's just not for me. It's not for me. I've said my piece on this time and time again, so we'll move on. This was an interesting one. Hit Row, NXT 2.0 faction. Hit Row, of course, Isaiah Swerve Scott is actually the North American champion. They've all been drafted to SmackDown. Now, I'm a big fan of the Hit Row faction. I think their work has been tremendous. I think the gimmick is tremendous. I think their promos and presentation, I think it's all great. And I think they can all be big stars. I think Isaiah Swerve Scott as North American champion, to be honest, has been a bit of a joke. He won it and has never defended it, ever. He has to be up there with the worst North American champion of all time. He won it and then just never defended it, ever. And he's going to drop it. Either he gets vacated or he drops the title soon, because these changes, these drafts they come into effect the night after Crown Jewel later on this month. So between now and then, Isaiah Swerve Scott's dropping the championship. Who to? I don't know. Whether it's Santos Escobar, whether it's whoever, I have no idea. But he's dropping the title. The one criticism I would have, and I've seen this on social media as well, that Hit Row are great, and the presentation of them is tremendous. The gimmick behind them is tremendous, but not so much Isaiah Swerve Scott, but other members of the faction are very green. Very, very green. And even now, you talk about B-Fab, very green. Very, very green, and that is still, I would say, a concern. But obviously WWE and Vince McMahon, they're a fan, and they want to see them on Friday nights. And obviously SmackDown's the A show. It's the biggest show. It's the show that's viewed by the most people. New names are exciting. I think Isaiah Swerve Scott will do well. He's smaller. He's a smaller guy. And again, how Vince McMahon will react to that, time will tell. And how WWE is going to present that, time will tell. But it's a very exciting run. It's a very exciting one. But like anything that was created in NXT, the old NXT, which Hit Row was, you never know what WWE really has planned for them on the main roster, and you never know how that transition is going to go. So we'll have to wait and see what happens when it comes to Hit Row. But exciting nevertheless. Keith Lee staying on Monday Night Raw. Keith Bearcat Lee, I should say. Of course, he's got that new name. Hopefully, we've heard about these new plans for Keith Lee, or they wanted to have a new sort of, obviously they've got the Bearcat name in there and a new push, new character. I think that's really going to start to come into effect with this draft selection. So interesting to see what their plans are going to be for Keith Lee going forward too. Naomi is staying on SmackDown, as she should be, considering she just appeared there, 3 weeks ago, 4 weeks ago. Still yet to have that match, and still complaining to Sonya Deville. But hopefully it goes somewhere. Everyone at this point wants to see Naomi have some success on SmackDown or do something on SmackDown. I still think she should keep butting heads with Sonya Deville, and then eventually she goes, right, I'm going to have to take this into my own hands, knocks on the door of Roman Reigns and the family and says, do something about it, and then suddenly she becomes the female member of the Bloodline. I think that would be very interesting. I don't know if that's the direction they're going to go in, but I think that's the direction they should go in. The Mysterios drafted to Monday Night Raw. I think this is a good one. Again, they've been SmackDown Tag Team Champions. They feuded with the likes of the Dirty Dogs. They've had matches against the Street Profits, with the Usos, and I think moving to Monday nights, even an interesting feud against RK Bro would be interesting, So I'm interested in seeing them go to Raw. I think eventually we're getting the split. It feels like that the underlying story here is that eventually RHEA is going to face his son, and I think Dominik's going to be the one to turn heel, I think. Again, I'll wait and see how that one plays out, because I don't know how I feel about it, or just if I really care, to be honest with you at this point. But moving to Raw, I don't think is a bad thing for them, it must be said. Next one was Jeff Hardy moving to SmackDown. I think this is a good move. I really do think this is quite a bit of a sleeper move, actually. The reason I say this is because I wrote an article for Sportskeeda a couple of days ago, and it was talking about opponents on the main roster that Roman Reigns has never faced before. And look, Jeff Hardy, this is probably going to be the final contract, certainly of his WWE career, maybe his pro wrestling career. He's never had a singles match against Roman Reigns. And at this point on SmackDown, we just need opponents for Roman Reigns. I think that's what WWE's thinking, because Roman Reigns isn't going to drop the Universal Championship anytime soon whatsoever. But he needs opponents. He's run through a lot of names, a lot of guys, whether it is Edge, John Cena, Kevin Owens, his cousin Jey Uso, Cesaro. The list goes on and on and on. Brock Lesnar sued, Finn Balor. He needs names and he needs opponents. He's never had a feud against Jeff Hardy. The issue is that Jeff Hardy's pretty ice cold, and the booking of him on Raw has been pretty terrible. But Jeff Hardy's name still means something. Jeff Hardy's still a big name. So a month feud with Roman Reigns and a pay-per-view main event for the Universal Championship. Roman Reigns beating Jeff Hardy for the Universal Championship in a main event still means something. This was a guy last year on SmackDown during the Performance Center era that he was being featured as one of SmackDown's top babyfaces. And is he the same Jeff Hardy that he was 10, 15 years ago? Of course he isn't. But he's still a former WWE champion. He's still very popular. He's still over with the crowd and still gets great reactions. So a 1 month pay-per-view feud, whether it's at the end of this year or the beginning of next year or wherever it may be, I don't see a problem with it. And of course, Jeff Hardy isn't going to win the Universal Championship, but it's something different. And it's a story to tell, and it's a first time ever match. We know how much WWE likes to have those kind of matches. So I'm all for Jeff Hardy moving to SmackDown and having that feud with Roman Reigns. Whether or not they'll do that, I don't know. But I think that's something they should consider. Finally, the final pick of night 1 of the WWE Draft was Austin Theory going to Monday Night Raw. We've seen Austin Theory do quite a few dark matches in recent weeks before, specifically SmackDown shows, but I think he's done it before Raw too. So this was kind of expected. Look, Austin Theory's been on the main roster before. He was on Raw. He was part of that faction with Andrade, Angel Garza, and Zelina Vega. Then, briefly, he was a disciple for Seth Rollins for maybe like 10 days, and then some scandals hit, and he got put down to the NXT roster and had to basically eat it for a while. He lost a load of matches, and then eventually joined up with Johnny Gargano in The Way. You know, his character is very entertaining. Obviously, he's got a great look, still very young, and Vince McMahon obviously was a fan of his because he got brought up. He competed on WrestleMania when he was like 23 years old for the Tag Team Championships. That's how significant and how much potential, obviously, Vince McMahon sees in Austin Theory. I don't know if we're going to see the same Austin Theory character we've seen in NXT, this basically jacked up musclehead that's an idiot. I don't know if we're going to see the same of that on the main roster because we kind of have a similar version in Riddle. So I don't know if we're going to see that or we're going to see something a little bit different from Austin Theory. But obviously, you look at him, he's everything that Vince McMahon dreams of in a WWE superstar. So I think this one's going to be very interesting, and I think he could be very successful on Monday Night Raw. I really do. So that was certainly an interesting pick for Raw, nonetheless. We had some more picks named on Talking Smack yesterday as well, so we'll get into those. SmackDown, the additional picks announced on Talking Smack were RHEA. Again, we've seen her do several dark matches before Raws and SmackDowns in recent weeks, so it bolsters the much-needed bolstering, actually, of the SmackDown Women's Division. Drew Gulak, he does nothing on Raw apart from chase the 24/7 championship, so it's just... he will just be there. He's hardly going to get a push. This was an interesting one in that Mace and T-Bar have been split up as a tag team. So Mace was moved to SmackDown, and obviously T-Bar was moved to Monday Night Raw. We'll touch on that in a second. Look, Mace has got a great look. I think Mace, out of all of them in Retribution, had the best look. He looks like Predator, doesn't he? And maybe Vince McMahon has seen that. The former Dio Madden, formerly a commentator on Monday Night Raw. Maybe those in WWE have said, look, this is a big guy. He's got a great look. He's still, a little bit green in terms of the ring. I think that has improved. And maybe they've just gone, you know what? We can do something with him. We're going in this vision and this idea that we want big guys, from a former sporting background. Mace fits that bill. So that's going to be one to keep an eye out for. I really think so. Mansoor and Mustafa Ali moved to SmackDown as well. No surprise considering they want the most eyeballs on Mansoor possible as they're heading into Crown Jewel as well. Of course, those big Saudi shows. And Mansoor, look, he's not just there because maybe he got his foot in the door because he's a Saudi star and they want to build up that relationship and keep that relationship sweet and they want to have a homegrown Saudi star to come back to all of these Saudi events that they've done in the past. But he's a good wrestler as well. And by all accounts, he's a good guy. So I'm interested to see how that one plays out too. And then Toni Storm was the final name announced as well. It's such a shame with Toni Storm. Like, she's capable of so much more, and just the way she's been caught up to the main roster and barely featured, apart from some weird backstage segments with Dolph Ziggler, is just odd. Just very, very odd to me. Other names announced for Monday Night Raw were RHEA. Who cares about the 24/7 championship at this point? I still can't believe it's around. Speaking of that 24/7 championship, Akira Tozawa staying on Monday Night Raw because you've got to have those comedy segments in there for the 24/7 championship. Heaven forbid we actually have no comedic segments with RHEA doing flips and Akira Tozawa still pretending to be a ninja because, again, it's 1990 on Monday nights. The Alpha Academy moving to Raw, which I think is actually a good one. Again, I think a feud between the Alpha Academy, RK Bro, or Alpha Academy and AJ Styles and Omos. That's interesting. I think Raw probably has the better tag team division at this point. Apollo Crews and Commander Aziz moving to Raw. It says a lot, doesn't it? I mean, earlier this year, Apollo Crews was getting the big push on SmackDown. Vince McMahon Massive character rechange. You're suddenly now, you speak with a Nigerian accent, and because you do, you also have a commander behind you. Again, because again, it's 1990, or it's 1985 in WWE, certainly in Vince McMahon's mind. So now he's getting that big push, wins the Intercontinental Championship at WrestleMania. Commander Aziz makes his debut at WrestleMania. And what happens now? Loses pretty much after he won the title, just lost over and over again. And now he's drafted to Raw during Talking Smack. It says a lot, doesn't it, about him? Doudrop staying on Raw. Drake Maverick. John Morrison, who I feel so bad for John Morrison. This guy's so talented, and yes, he's in his 40s at this point. I think he's like 40. But still, his in-ring work is just as good as anyone in WWE. His mic skills used to be the issue that let him down in the past. They're fine at this point. The gimmick sucks. The whole Moist stuff, Moist TV and the drip stick and all this kind of stuff. Miz turns on him, then Miz goes off, starts dancing. So heaven forbid we build up John Morrison for when the Miz comes back. No, he's just going to be on main event. Ridiculous. T-Bar, as I mentioned, is going to Raw. Interesting to see what they'll do with T-Bar. I'm kind of worried about that, to be honest with you. Dominik Dijakovic's a great wrestler, and some of his matches against Keith Lee in NXT were unbelievable. But I have in my heart a feeling that they prefer Mace, and that's why Mace was drafted to SmackDown. So that will be interesting. Nia Jax staying on Monday Night Raw. She's currently on the shelf right now. R-Truth staying on Raw as well, because, of course, that's where the 24/7 Championship is. And Zelina Vega, who, of course, must be regretting coming back to WWE. Not that she's making good money, because I'm sure that she is, but she was like one of the last names in Talking Smack, which says a lot, doesn't it? That's what happens. That's what happens if you support unionization. Speaking of SmackDown, we actually saw, this was pretty fun, wasn't it? We actually saw a promo by Brock Lesnar. Brock Lesnar actually cutting some promos recently, and it was good. It was good. It's always fun hearing Brock do promos, especially when they work out well like this. But it was very good because Brock Lesnar confirmed that he is a free agent. During the draft edition of SmackDown on Fox, Lesnar confronted Universal Champion Roman Reigns and Paul Heyman in the ring. This was right after Reigns was drafted to the blue brand. A brawl broke out that led to SmackDown Tag Team Champions the Usos rushing to the ring. Lesnar took them out with German suplexes and a pair of F5s as Reigns watched from the ramp with Paul Heyman. And later on backstage, Kayla Braxton was having an interview with newest SmackDown star Jeff Hardy, but Brock Lesnar interrupted. Lesnar announced that he is now a free agent thanks to his good friend Paul Heyman, and because he is a free agent, he can do whatever he wants. Now, Lesnar referring to Heyman as a good friend led to Reigns yelling at Heyman in a backstage segment. Reigns then ordered Heyman to go to Monday's WWE Draft Night 2 edition of Raw on the USA Network in Nashville. Get there in the end, guys. And to see it that the Usos are drafted to SmackDown. Reigns then told the Usos to go to Raw with Heyman and to make it clear that they are to be drafted to SmackDown, and if they are not, to leave Heyman for dead at Raw. So I think it basically means Lesnar's probably going to be at Raw on Monday, the Usos are going to be at Raw on Monday, and Heyman's going to be at Raw on Monday as well. Brock Lesnar being a free agent, there was rumors, wasn't there, that Brock was going to be drafted to Raw during the draft, and I think basically with Brock being a free agent, WWE is just being very clever, but being very careful. They're basically saying, look, we don't know what we want Brock to do when it comes to the Royal Rumble or it comes to WrestleMania next year, so we're keeping our options open. So Brock, we know his appearances are limited. We know that he's only scheduled for a certain amount of matches, certain amount of dates per year, and we want to be flexible on that. So if we decide that we want to have Brock versus Bobby Lashley, we can do it. If we want to see we want to have Brock versus whoever on SmackDown, we can do it. And that's the same situation there, I think. So not totally surprising there, but I love the segment. I thought it was very good. Finally, speaking of Raw on Monday, Brock could be there, the Usos are going to be there, Heyman's going to be there, and Goldberg's going to be there as well, because Goldberg is set for the Night 2 of the WWE Draft for Monday Night Raw. He's been officially announced for Monday's Raw from the Bridgestone Arena in Nashville, Tennessee. This will be to continue Goldberg's feud with Bobby Lashley, because who cares? Again, who cares? But we're going to have Goldberg versus Lashley 2 at Crown Jewel, which again, I think Goldberg's going to win, and that feud's going to continue. So I would expect Lashley to be drafted to, who knows where he'll be drafted at this point? That's a bit of a question, isn't it? There is a chance, I suppose, Lashley could be drafted to SmackDown in the draft. Either way, Goldberg's going to be there to confront Lashley on Monday night. I'm sure they'll get in a physical altercation, and their match for Crown Jewel will be made official. So well, wait and see what happens there. But look, guys, as always, it's just one man's opinion. What are your thoughts on all these WWE news stories spoken about today? What are your thoughts on night 1 of the WWE Draft? Let me know your thoughts in the comment section below. I'll do my best to respond and reply to all of your comments. Really enjoy interacting with you guys, talking about WWE, AEW, Impact Wrestling, New Japan Pro Wrestling, all things pro wrestling here on the channel. So be sure to get involved in the community. Drop a comment below. All opinions are welcome. If you have enjoyed this video, please do smash a like. on the like button too. Really does help us out here on YouTube. Got the rankings and get into people's recommendation feeds if they haven't seen our videos previously. But most importantly, if you haven't already, please do subscribe to Wrestle News 365. You can do that by clicking the bottom right hand corner of the screen right now. Or if you wait a few seconds, there'll be a subscribe button at the end of this video along with another video for you to watch. Thank you very much for watching, listening, streaming, or have you come across this video today. And I'll speak to you again very, very soon.
Hey guys, thank you for watching, listening, streaming, or however you come across this video today. Be sure to click on the video on the right there to watch our next video, or click the bottom there to subscribe, or the bottom right hand corner. Thank you very much, and I'll speak to you again very soon.